The streets of Quiapo, Manila, were alive with the kind of chaos only locals could understand. Jeepneys roaring by with their rainbow colors, vendors shouting, "Balut! Peanuts! Lumpia!" and the thick scent of street food curling through the humid afternoon air. Somewhere between the blur of noise and movement stood a small boy with a cardboard box for a stage and a sparkle in his dark brown eyes. His name was Eli Ramos, and though he was only 9, he carried himself with a quiet grace that made people stop mid-step. On his box were hand-drawn letters in red marker. Eli the magician, 1 smile per show. He shuffled a deck of old playing cards so worn that the corners bent and the colors faded. Every motion was practiced but full of wonder. The people passing by, jeepney drivers, office workers, students, couldn't help but slow down. Something about this barefoot boy with a magician's heart drew them in. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," Eli announced in a voice far too confident for someone his size, "for my next trick I will make this coin disappear." A few onlookers chuckled. Some children gathered closer, whispering to one another. Eli held up a single peso coin shiny in the sunlight. He waved his small hands in front of it, his lips moving silently. Then, poof! It was gone. The kids gasped, the adults clapped. But Eli wasn't done. He reached behind a woman's ear and pulled out the same coin, grinning wide. "Mom, I think you dropped this," he said with a wink. The woman laughed, pressing a few coins into his hat. "You're a clever little one," she said. From a few steps away, Maritz Ramos, Eli's mother, watched with pride from behind her cart of banana Q and bottled water. Her hands were busy but her eyes never left her son. She knew his father would have been proud too. 2 years ago, Eli's father, Miguel Ramos, a jeepney driver, used to perform small magic tricks during long traffic jams. Nothing fancy, just the kind that made kids giggle and passengers forget the heat. "It's not the trick that matters, Eli," Miguel used to say, showing his son how to hide a coin behind his knuckles. "It's the feeling you leave behind." When Miguel passed away after a sudden illness, the magic seemed to disappear from their lives. But not for long. One night, while sorting through his father's old belongings, Eli found a dusty deck of cards, half complete, and a note tucked inside the box. It read, "If you ever forget how to smile, make someone else smile first." That night Eli practiced for hours. The next day, he went to the street corner, stood on a box and performed his first trick. He didn't earn much, but his mother smiled for the first time in months, and to him, that was worth more than any coin. Now, 2 years later, this was his daily routine. He performed after school, earning enough to help his mom buy rice candles and sometimes a small treat. The neighbors called him Egg Munting Madiakiro, the little magician. That afternoon, a small crowd gathered again. Eli performed his favorite trick, a paper rose that turned real. He borrowed a crumpled receipt, twisted it in his fingers, and then blew gently. A real, red rose appeared between his palms. The crowd gasped. A little girl whispered, "Is it real?" Eli smiled and handed her the flower. "The magic's real if you believe it is." Laughter and applause followed. People tossed coins and small bills into his hat. Eli bowed deeply, his grin wide enough to show the gap between his teeth. But as the crowd faded and the sun began to sink behind the concrete skyline, Eli's energy softened. He packed up his things carefully, the deck of cards, the handkerchief, the paper roses. He crossed the street to his mother's cart where she handed him a bottle of cold water. "Good job today, Anak," she said. "You made them happy." Eli leaned on her shoulder, sweaty and tired. "Ma, do you think Papa can see me?" Maritz smiled sadly, brushing his hair back. "Of course he can. Every time you make someone smile, he smiles too." Eli nodded, looking up at the sky where streaks of orange and pink painted the clouds. "I think he'd tell me to practice more." His mother laughed softly. "That sounds like him." As they packed their things to go home, a tall man with a camera approached. He had been watching from across the street, captivated by the boy's simple tricks and pure joy. The man said kindly, "You're amazing, kid. What's your name?" Eli looked up shyly. Eli the magician." The man smiled. "Mind if I record one of your tricks?" Eli hesitated, then nodded. He performed his favorite, the disappearing coin followed by the rose. The man filmed everything, clapping at the end. "That was wonderful. I'm from Ireland. My daughter loves magic. She'll be so happy to see this." Eli grinned. "Tell her to practice every day. That's how you make real magic." The man thanked him, gave him a 500 peso bill, and walked away, still smiling. Eli stared at the money in disbelief. It was more than he made in a week. His mother's eyes filled with tears. That night, after dinner, they watched the video the man had uploaded. Within hours it started getting views, hundreds, then thousands. Comments flooded in. "This boy has the purest soul. I cried watching this. What a beautiful child. He doesn't need fancy tricks, his heart is the magic." By morning, news outlets had shared the video. People from all over the world were commenting and donating to help Eli and his mother. But one message stood out. It was from a talent scout named Fiona O'Reilly, representing Ireland's Got Talent 2025. The message read, "We'd love to invite him to audition. His story touched our hearts, Maurice gasped when she read it. Eli blinked, not quite believing. Mao Ireland. That's where the leprechauns live, right? His mother laughed through tears. Yes, Anak, maybe you'll show them what real magic looks like. Eli stood there, holding his worn-out deck of cards, staring at the glowing message on the cracked phone screen. Somewhere deep in his heart he felt a warmth, like a whisper from his father's voice. Real magic isn't in your hands, son, it's in your heart. That night, as he drifted to sleep under the faint buzz of their single bulb, Eli dreamed of a bright stage, of golden lights, of a crowd that believed, not in tricks but in love, and so began the journey of a little boy from the streets of Manila, who would soon show the world that sometimes, the simplest magic can change everything. The airport was colder than anything Eli had ever felt before. The blast of air conditioning made him shiver beneath his oversized hoodie, but excitement kept his heart warm. Around him, people bustled, some rushing to catch flights, others saying tearful goodbyes. Eli clutched his deck of cards tightly, as if letting go might make everything disappear. Beside him, his mother, Marit, held a worn canvas bag filled with their few belongings. She was nervous too, though she tried not to show it. For both of them, this was a journey beyond imagination. Neither had ever left the Philippines before, let alone traveled halfway across the world. Mali whispered, eyes wide as he stared out at the gleaming airplanes through the glass. Do you think they'll really let me perform there? His mother smiled softly. They invited you, Anak. That means they already believe in you. He nodded, but doubt still flickered in his eyes. A street boy from Manila, performing on TV. It sounded like something from one of the bedtime stories his father used to tell. Yet here he was, ticket in hand, heart pounding, ready to chase a dream that began on a cardboard box. As they boarded the plane, Eli pressed his face against the window, whispering goodbye to the twinkling lights of Manila. I'll make you proud, Papa, he murmured. The flight to Ireland felt endless. The hum of the engines lulled him into short bursts of sleep filled with dreams of magic lights, cheering crowds, and his father's laughter echoing in the distance. When he finally opened his eyes, dawn painted the clouds gold and pink. Below, the green fields of Ireland spread out like a giant patchwork quilt. Welcome to Dublin, the captain announced. Eli's heart skipped a beat. He grinned at his mother, who squeezed his hand tightly. You ready, my little magician? He nodded. Let's make some magic, my. But the moment they stepped off the plane, the excitement met reality. The cold hit him like a wall. His breath came out in little puffs of mist, and he wrapped his arms around himself. The airport signs were in English, and though Eli could read some, the accents around him were strange and fast. He felt small again, like a trick that might not work. A kind woman from the Ireland's Got Talent production team greeted them with a warm smile and led them to a van. Welcome to Ireland, Eli, we're so happy you're here. Eli nodded shyly, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Mom. The van drove through streets lined with old buildings and green parks. Everything looked so different, quiet, clean, and unfamiliar. Eli's eyes darted everywhere, soaking it in. But the further they drove, the more his nerves tightened. The thought of performing in front of strangers, on a stage broadcast to millions, made his stomach twist. At the hotel, Eli practiced in front of the mirror. He shuffled his deck again and again until his small fingers ached. But the cards didn't move like they used to. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was fear creeping into his hands. He sat on the bed, staring at his reflection. Ma, he said softly. What if they don't like my tricks? Maurice sat beside him, brushing his hair gently. You're not there to impress them, Eli, you're there to share your heart. Remember what your papa used to say. He nodded. Real magic is in your heart. That's right. Just do what you love. The rest will follow. Her words steadied him a little, but when they arrived at the Ireland's Got Talent studio the next morning, his courage wavered again. The stage building was enormous, bright lights, cameras, makeup artists, and contestants bustling everywhere. Performers from all over the world were there, singers, dancers, comedians, even another magician with a suitcase full of props and shining silver cups. Eli watched in awe as a girl about his age made a dove appear from her sleeve. The bird fluttered gracefully, landing on her shoulder. She noticed Eli's wide eyes and smiled politely, though her assistant whispered something that made her giggle. Eli looked down at his old deck of cards. The edges were frayed, the colors fading. He didn't even have a real magician's outfit, just a black jacket donated by a church friend back home. Whispers spread behind him. Is he performing with that? One contestant said, pointing at a snickered. Looks like a souvenir from a garage sale. Eli's cheeks burned. He turned away, clutching his cards to his chest. The noise of laughter and chatter blurred around him. He wanted to run back home, to the comfort of the Manila streets where people believed in his magic. Then he felt a familiar touch, his mother's hand on his shoulder. She knelt in front of him, her eyes soft but strong. Eli, she said quietly, don't listen to them. You have something they don't. He frowned. What's that? Hurt. Her smile was all the magic he needed. She brushed the dust off his jacket, straightened his collar, and whispered, "Go show them the kind of magic that made your papa smile." Ely took a deep breath. Around him, the sounds of the stage crew faded. The announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "Next up, from Manila, Philippines, please welcome, Eli the magician." As he walked toward the stage entrance, his small sneakers echoed on the floor. The blinding lights made him squint. The judge's table loomed in the distance. 4 famous faces he'd only seen on television. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, the rustle of anticipation. Backstage, the stage manager gave him a reassuring nod. "Ready, kid?" Eli hesitated, then nodded. "Yes sir, just breathe. The stage loves the brave." The curtain rose. Eli stepped forward, his heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. For a split second he froze. The sea of faces, the cameras, the lights, it was overwhelming. But then, in the corner of his vision, he saw his mother standing backstage, her hands clasped in prayer. And suddenly, it wasn't scary anymore. It was just another street corner, another chance to make someone smile. He lifted his head. The audience fell soft glow. Ely took one deep breath and began his performance. No fancy music, no big props, just a little boy, a handkerchief, and a worn-out deck of cards, ready to remind the world that even the smallest hands can hold the greatest magic. As the first card floated into the air, the crowd leaned in, their skepticism melting into wonder. For that one perfect moment, Ely wasn't the poor boy from Manila anymore. He was Ely the magician, the boy who carried love in his hands and courage in his heart. And though he didn't know it yet, the world was about to fall in love with him. The lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. And there, at the center of the massive Ireland's Got Talent stage, stood Eli Ramos, a 9-year-old boy from the streets of Manila, his small hands trembling slightly as he held his deck of old playing cards. The host's voice echoed from the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, all the way from the Philippines, please welcome Eli the magician." A polite wave of applause filled the theater. Kind, but uncertain. From their seats, the judges exchanged skeptical glances. A child magician with no assistants, no shiny props, and nothing but a tattered deck of cards. It didn't look promising. Ely looked out into the sea of faces. The lights were blinding, and his heart pounded like a drum inside his chest. For a moment, he wanted to turn back, to run into his mother's arms and hide from the thousands of eyes watching him. But then, he remembered his father's words, "Real magic isn't in your hands, son, it's in your heart." He took a deep breath and bowed slightly, his small figure barely visible against the vast stage. Then, without a single word, he began. He flicked his wrist, and a card shot into the air like a bird taking flight. The audience watched as it floated gracefully, turning midair before landing perfectly back in his palm. He held it up, a queen of hearts, and smiled shyly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The movement had been too smooth, too natural for a child. The judges leaned forward. Ely took a step closer to the front of the stage. His movements were gentle, almost like a dance. He fanned out the cards and blew lightly across them. As he did, the cards began to shimmer, turning from faded white to vibrant red, then gold, as if they were glowing from within. The audience began to applaud softly, but Ely wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single handkerchief. It was old, slightly wrinkled, and embroidered with small letters MR, his father's initials. Holding the handkerchief in both hands, Eli slowly folded it into a small bundle. Then he opened it, and from within, a single paper butterfly floated out. The audience gasped again as it fluttered in the air, circling Ely before landing on his shoulder. He smiled softly, never speaking, his eyes shining under the lights. One of the judges, Esling O'Connell, whispered, "He's not just performing, he's telling a story." And he was. Each illusion that followed carried emotion, not just technique. When he made coins vanish, they didn't just disappear, they seemed to dissolve into light, scattering like fireflies. When he folded a piece of paper into a heart and blew on it, it became a glowing red origami heart that floated above his palm. The music in the background, a soft instrumental piano piece, grew stronger. The camera zoomed in on Ali's face. His eyes weren't focused on the tricks, they were distant, remembering something deeper. And then came his final act. He reached into his pocket once more and pulled out a torn photograph. The audience could see it on the large screen behind him, a picture of a happy family, a father, a mother, and a small boy between them and innocent. But half the photo was missing. The crowd grew still. Ely held up the torn picture, staring at it for a moment. His lips trembled slightly. Then, he placed it gently on the small wooden table before him. With delicate fingers he waved his hand over it. The torn edges of the photograph began to move. Slowly, magically, the missing half appeared, glowing faintly, until the full image was whole again. Behind him, the screen illuminated with a soft golden light revealing the words, "Love never disappears." The audience gasped audibly. One woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes. Ely lifted the photograph, kissed it gently, and held it against his chest. Then he turned toward the crowd and bowed deeply. For a few seconds there was silence, total heavy silence, and then, a sound like a wave crashing over him. The entire audience rose to their feet, applauding, cheering, crying. The judges stood, their faces wet with tears. Even the stage crew behind the cameras were clapping. Ely blinked in shock. He hadn't expected this. In his mind, he had just shown them a few tricks and a piece of his heart. But what he didn't realize was that he had done something far more powerful. He hadn't just performed magic. He had shared love. One of the judges, Simon Delaney, pressed his microphone button, his voice shaky as he spoke. Ely, I don't know how to describe what we just saw. You didn't just make objects appear, you made feelings appear. You reminded us all why we believe in hope, in family, in love. The audience applauded again. Ely's eyes welled up with tears. Another judge leaned forward. You didn't even speak a word, and yet, we all understood your heart. That's true magic. Ely wiped his face quickly, trying not to cry. His small hands trembled as he picked up his father's handkerchief again. He whispered so softly it could barely be heard through the microphone clipped to his shirt. This is for my papa. At that, the camera panned to his mother standing backstage, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. A crew member placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "He did it." As the applause continued, golden confetti began to fall from the ceiling. The stage lights turned warm and soft, casting a glow over Eli as if the heavens themselves were shining on him. Ely looked up, his eyes wide in awe. He reached out, catching a piece of confetti between his fingers, then smiled. For the first time, he didn't feel nervous or small. He didn't feel like the poor boy from Manila. He felt like his father was right there beside him, smiling proudly, whispering the same words he'd always said, "Real magic isn't in your hands, son. It's in your heart." When the host came on stage, the audience was still on their feet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted over the applause, "give it up once more for Ely the magician." The roar grew even louder. People were crying and cheering. Some even held up their phones with flashlights waving in the air like stars. Ely stood there, overwhelmed, his heart full. He took a deep bow, holding the photograph close to his chest. For a long moment he didn't move. He just stood in the golden light, eyes closed, smiling through tears. In that instant he wasn't just a contestant on a talent show, he was a message, a reminder that love can cross oceans, survive loss, and appear again, whole and shining, in the hands of a little boy who believed in magic. Backstage, as Ely walked off the stage, people clapped and hugged him. Crew members wiped their eyes. His mother ran to him, gathering him into her arms. "You did it, Anak," she whispered, crying into his hair. "You showed them your heart." Ely looked up at her, his small voice trembling. "Did Papa see it too?" Marit smiled through her tears. "Oh yes, he saw everything." And as they stood there, under the golden light of the stage, Ely felt it, deep inside, that his father's love had never disappeared. It had only transformed into the magic that now lived within him. The studio had fallen into the kind of silence that doesn't happen often on live television. For a moment after Eli's final bow, time itself seemed to stop. The little boy stood on stage, golden confetti drifting gently around him like slow shining rain. His small chest rose and fell rapidly, his eyes wide, as though even he couldn't quite believe what he had just done. Then, suddenly, the applause began as a single clap, then grew, swelling into a thunderous standing ovation that filled the entire theater. People cheered, cried, and shouted his name, "Ely, Ely," as if willing their hearts to reach him. The judges stood too, their faces shining with tears under the bright stage lights. Eli blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. His trembling fingers still clutched the torn photograph, now whole again, pressed against his heart. He looked out at the endless rows of faces cheering for him, faces from a country he'd never known, people who didn't even speak his language, and yet somehow they understood him perfectly. He had spoken no words, but he had said everything. The host walked on stage, a microphone in hand, his voice full of awe. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said over the roaring applause, "we have just witnessed something truly special tonight. I think we can all agree that this little boy from Manila has just shown us what real magic looks like." The crowd cheered louder, many still wiping away tears. Ely smiled shyly and waved. He wanted to say something, to thank them, but the lump in his throat was too big. His eyes darted toward the side of the stage where his mother stood, her hands covering her mouth, her whole body trembling with pride. He mouthed the words, "I love you, Mo." That was when one of the judges, Aisling O'Connell, leaned forward, pressing her button to speak. Her voice quivered. "Ali, you've left every one of us speechless. I've been in this industry for 20 years, and I've never seen magic used the way you used it tonight. You didn't just perform, you told a story of love, loss and hope. You made us all remember someone we've lost, and you reminded us that love never disappears." The audience cheered again. Eli's lower lip trembled. Another judge, Simon Delaney, cleared his throat, his eyes red. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes we see acts that are loud and spectacular, full of explosions and lights, but what you did, Ely, was quiet, pure. You showed us that magic isn't about tricks, it's about the heart behind them, And you, young man, have a heart bigger than this entire stage. The camera zoomed in on Eli's tear-streaked face. He tried to smile but his lips wobbled and instead, he burst into tears. The audience, it collectively, and Simon stood, walking down from the judge's table. He approached the stage, kneeling beside the little boy. "Come here," he said gently, opening his arms. Eli hesitated for a moment then ran to him burying his face in the judge's shoulder. The crowd clapped even louder. "You've reminded us," Simon whispered into the microphone. "That kindness and love, those are the greatest forms of magic." Backstage Maritz was sobbing so hard she could barely stand. A staff member guided her onto the stage, and when Eli saw her, he immediately broke free from Simon's arms and ran straight into hers. "Ma!" he cried, hugging her tightly. "I did it! I really did it!" Maritz held him, trembling, unable to speak through her tears. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the embrace, the mother who had sold banana Q on the streets of Manila, holding her little magician who had just touched the hearts of millions. The crowd rose again to their feet, clapping in rhythm. It was no longer just applause for a performance, it was gratitude, for the reminder of what pure love looks like. When the lights dimmed and the host prepared to announce the final moment of judgment, the audience began chanting. It started softly, from a few voices in the front row, "Golden buzzer, golden buzzer." Within seconds, the entire theater was chanting, stomping their feet, clapping their hands, demanding it. The judges looked at one another, tears streaming down their cheeks, then nodded. Aisling reached forward, slamming her hand down on the golden buzzer. The theater exploded. Golden confetti rained from the ceiling, swirling around Eli and his mother as they clung to each other in disbelief. The music swelled, triumphant and emotional, while the crowd screamed their approval. Eli's mouth dropped open, his hands shaking. "Ma," he whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "What's happening?" Maritz laughed through her tears. "It means you're going straight to the live shows, Anak. You did it." Eli turned slowly in a circle, looking up as the golden light bathed him. His small figure seemed to glow beneath the falling confetti. For a brief, breathtaking moment, he looked almost otherworldly, like a child made of light and love. The cameras zoomed in on his face, his tears, his smile, the disbelief written in every line. It was the kind of moment people would replay for years to come. That night, the clip of Eli's performance spread across the internet like wildfire. Within hours it had millions of views. Hashtags trended worldwide and Eli the magician, the love never disappears, Afro Manila to magic. People from all corners of the globe, America, the UK, Canada, Singapore, shared his video with captions like, "I just cried over a 9-year-old magician. This is what the world needs right now. His story reminded me of my dad. Thank you, Eli. Magic is real, and this boy proved it." Even celebrities tweeted about him. A famous illusionist from Las Vegas wrote, "This kid has more heart than all of us combined." In the Philippines, Eli's hometown woke up to the news. The video played on morning shows. People in the streets gathered around small televisions in sari stores, wiping tears as they watched their very own Munting Matty Caro on the big stage. Neighbors cheered, vendors smiled, and jeepney drivers honked their horns in celebration. It wasn't just Eli's victory, it felt like the triumph of every Filipino child who had ever dared to dream. Meanwhile in Dublin, as Eli sat in the hotel room with his mother, he watched the performance replay on TV. He looked so small sitting on the edge of the bed, his deck of cards still in his hands. "Ma," he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "They're saying I made the whole world cry." His mother smiled softly, brushing his hair back. "You didn't make them cry, Anak, you made them feel. That's what real magic does." Eli looked down at the cards in his hand, running his thumb along their frayed edges. "Papa would have liked it, ho." Maritz took his hand gently, pressing it over his heart. "He saw it all. He's right here, remember." Eli nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. "I miss him." "I know," she whispered. "But every time you make someone smile, he smiles too." Outside, the soft Dublin rain began to fall, tapping against the window like gentle applause from heaven. Eli leaned his forehead against the glass, watching the city lights blur through the drizzle. "Ma," he said after a long pause, "do you think I can make more people smile?" Maritz smiled through tears. "Oh, my boy, you already are." And in that quiet hotel room, halfway across the world from the busy streets of Manila, a small Filipino boy understood something his father had always tried to teach him. That magic isn't about illusion. It's about connection. And when it comes from the heart, it can change the whole world. Months passed, and the world could not forget the little magician from Manila. Every network replayed his audition. Every social media platform overflowed with clips of him holding the torn and restored photo of his father. There was something timeless in that moment. Something deeper than performance. It wasn't just a child's act, it was a message that love, no matter how far or how lost, always finds its way back. Eli didn't fully understand how famous he had become. To him, fame wasn't real, only his father's memory was. He still practiced in quiet corners of their hotel room, whispering softly, "For you, Papa," before every shuffle of cards. When the live finals approached, he felt nervous for the first time. The pressure was heavier now. He wasn't just performing for the judges, he was representing his entire country. Back in Manila, schools planned viewing parties, and the church bells of their barangay had rung in his honor the night he got the golden buzzer. His mother showed him pictures of children, holding up signs that read, "Fly high Eli, our little magician of hope." Eli had smiled but stayed quiet. He didn't care about winning, he just wanted to tell one last story. The night of the finals arrived. The theater was packed, and the world was watching live. Cameras panned across the audience filled with flags, Irish, American, Filipino, all waving side by side. The air buzzed with emotion and expectation. Backstage, Eli stood small in his oversized white suit, his magician's hat slightly crooked. His mother knelt before him, fixing his collar and whispering, "Whatever happens tonight, Anak, remember, Papa's already proud." "And so am I," Eli nodded, clutching the photo of his father one last time. Then he slipped it into the pocket of his suit, right next to his heart. When the host called his name, "Please welcome back Eli Santos from the Philippines," the crowd roared as though welcoming home a hero. Eli walked out slowly under a single spotlight. The stage was dark except for that one circle of light around him. A grand piano sat to one side untouched. A small table stood in front of him, holding a deck of cards, a single rose and a candle. Soft music began to play, a gentle instrumental version of A Million Dreams. Ali looked into the camera, his voice quiet but steady. "My papa always said magic is just love wearing a disguise. Tonight, I want to show you what love really looks like." The audience fell into absolute silence. He began with a simple trick, making cards float one by one, as if lifted by invisible strings. The cards danced in the air, weaving through his fingers like butterflies. Then he waved his hand, and each card turned into a photo, one of him and his mother, one of his father carrying him as a baby, one of their small home in Manila. The crowd gasped. Then, softly, he whispered, "Sometimes people disappear." He flicked his wrist, and all the photos turned blank, just white paper. The audience's breath caught. The boy looked down sadly. "But love," he said, looking up with tears in his eyes, "never does." He lifted the rose from the table, twirling it slowly. The petals began to fall one by one, floating to the ground. When the last petal dropped, he waved his hand over the stem, and the flower bloomed again, fuller and brighter than before. The crowd broke into applause, but he wasn't done. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo of his father, the same one from his audition. He tore it again into pieces, but this time, instead of restoring it with his hands, he placed the pieces into the flame of the candle. They burned softly, curling into ash. The audience gasped in horror. Eli whispered, "Sometimes love looks like letting go." He blew out the candle. The stage went dark. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, suddenly, the piano behind him began to play by itself, soft, gentle notes filling the air like a lullaby. On the giant screen behind him, a video began to play. It was grainy, old footage of his father sitting in their small home, smiling into the camera. "Hey, little magician," the recording said. "Remember, son, if you ever feel scared, just close your eyes and think of my hands clapping for you." Gasps echoed through the hall. Eli stood motionless, tears streaming down his face as the crowd sobbed openly. The video faded into an image of his father smiling beside the words, "Love never disappears." Eli turned back to the candle. He waved his hand gently over the smoke, and from the darkness, a glowing white dove appeared. It perched softly on his shoulder. "This is for you, Papa," Eli whispered, and then, lifting his hand, he released the dove. It flew upward, wings catching the golden light, circling above the stage before vanishing into the rafters. The audience stood, clapping and crying, unable to contain themselves. Even the judges were on their feet, holding hands across the table, tears streaming freely. The host's voice cracked with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think there's a single dry eye in this theater. That was not just a performance. That was a gift." When the results were finally announced later that night, Eli didn't win the competition. He came in second. But when the confetti fell, the crowd didn't chant the winner's name, they chanted his, "Allah, Allah!" Even the champion walked over, hugging him tightly and saying, "You're the real winner tonight." Backstage, reporters and producers surrounded him, but Eli just kept asking, "Can I call my mama?" When they finally let him, he ran into her arms and said through his tears, "Papa saw it, I know he did." Maritz held him close.
"Yes, Anak,"
she whispered. And so did the whole world. Weeks later, when Ellie and Maritz returned to Manila, the airport was flooded with people holding banners, flowers and flags. News cameras flashed, children waved handmade magic wands, and elders cried as they watched the boy who had carried their hearts across oceans. A woman from the crowd reached out and touched Marita's hand. "Your son reminded us that love never disappears," she said softly. Maritz smiled through tears. That's all he ever wanted. That night, back home in their little house, Eli sat by the window holding a new deck of cards. He shuffled slowly, smiling to himself. He said, Do you think Papa would still watch my shows from heaven? Maritz looked up from her sewing and smiled gently. He doesn't miss a single one. Ely grinned, his eyes twinkling. Then I'll keep making him clap. He turned one card over. It wasn't a card from his deck. It was an old photograph that had somehow slipped inside. His father's smile beamed up at him. Ely laughed softly. You're still here, huh? The candle flickered beside him, and for a moment, it felt like the air shimmered. Somewhere deep in his heart, he heard his father's voice again. Warm, full of pride. Always, my little magician, always. Eli closed his eyes and smiled. Outside, the stars above Manila glimmered brighter than usual that night, and for everyone who had seen his story. From Dublin to Manila, from living rooms to hearts across the world. The boy from the Philippines had given them something unforgettable, a reminder that even when everything else fades away, one thing remains constant: love never disappears.